NASA's new administrator just changed everything. On day one, Jared Isaacman said whoever finishes their lunar lander first gets the contract, SpaceX or Blue Origin. When SpaceX fell behind, they pitched a simplified mission. Everyone's first thought? Crew Dragon. It's proven, reliable, already flying. Why not just go a bit further? But here's the problem. That bit further isn't what it seems. What if every solution just moves the hardest part to somewhere else? Let's dive right in. The moment engineers started running the numbers on Dragon for lunar missions, they hit a wall that most people don't see coming. Dragon was designed as a low Earth orbit taxi. That's it. And there's a massive difference between bringing astronauts home from the International Space Station and bringing them back from the moon. When Dragon returns from the ISS, it's moving at about 7.8 kilometers per second when it hits the atmosphere. Fast, but manageable. The heat shield was built for exactly that speed. But coming back from the moon, you're hitting Earth's atmosphere at nearly 11 kilometers per second. That's not just a little bit faster, it's an entirely different thermal regime. The heat shield would need to be completely redesigned, the structure reinforced, the avionics upgraded to handle deep space radiation. You're essentially building a new spacecraft. And here's where it gets worse. Even if you somehow upgraded Dragon to survive lunar return speeds, you haven't solved the real problem. Because the issue isn't just about coming home, it's about the energy budget for the entire mission. Let's break down what actually has to happen. Getting from the lunar surface back to Earth requires roughly the same amount of energy no matter what route you take. Physics doesn't negotiate. You only get real efficiency gains when you do your burns, where velocity is already high, in low Earth orbit, in low lunar orbit, or during direct atmospheric entry. Those are the sweet spots where every kilogram of propellant gives you maximum bang for your buck. But what if you try to be clever? What if you have Dragon meet Starship halfway on the return journey? Or what if you split the Earth return burn into smaller chunks to save propellant? This is where orbital mechanics starts punishing you. The Oberth effect, which basically says burns are more efficient at high speeds, works against every clever workaround. If Starship slows down enough for Dragon to safely rendezvous in some high Earth orbit, you've already burned most of the propellant you were trying to save. And doing it earlier is even worse because you're burning fuel where it's least effective. So here's the trap. Every attempt to avoid the hard parts just moves the difficulty somewhere else. You can't make Dragon deep space capable without years of development. You can't avoid refueling in lunar orbit without forcing Starship to do a fully propulsive Earth capture, which quietly adds about 3 kilometers per second of delta V that simply isn't available, even with additional refueling in low Earth orbit. The physics is relentless. And this is exactly what NASA understands that casual observers miss. Now, some people have suggested using another large vehicle to give Starship a push, essentially having a second Starship or a depot act like a tug to transfer energy without HLS burning its own propellant. On paper, this almost works. It respects where energy actually matters in the trajectory. But here's the reality check. Docking 2 Starship-class vehicles and pushing enormous thrust through a docking interface has never been demonstrated. Any failure would be instantly catastrophic. NASA would classify this as an entirely new high-risk architecture and demand multiple uncrewed demonstrations before letting astronauts anywhere near it. So what does this all mean? If you strip away the wishful thinking and look at the requirements honestly, you're asking for a mission architecture that avoids lunar refueling, avoids turning Dragon into a deep space vehicle, avoids crew rating Falcon Heavy, keeps tanker launches low, and still gets astronauts home safely. That's an impossibly tight box. And this is where the real conversation starts. If the concern is that Starship development, especially orbital refueling, could delay Artemis landings, then there's no workaround that still relies on Starship. You can't fix Starship delays by adding more Starship complexity. In that scenario, the only alternatives are sticking with SLS and Orion, or potentially switching to Blue Origin's Blue Moon if it's ready first. Those systems exist specifically to bypass Starship risk. But here's the flip side. If the real concern is that SLS and Orion can't support a meaningful flight cadence and will eventually need to be retired anyway, then the cleanest answer is counterintuitive. Lean fully into Starship from the start. No hybrids, no half measures, a pure Starship architecture. This is what Elon Musk has been saying for years. Starship was designed to fly the entire lunar mission end to end. Direct lunar entry, descent, and landing with Starship. Direct Earth return with Starship. No reliance on other systems. And suddenly that approach stops looking reckless and starts looking inevitable. Here's why. Lunar orbit refueling keeps appearing in every analysis, no matter how hard engineers try to design around it. Not because it's elegant or convenient, but because it's the least bad place to pay the energy bill. Every alternative looks simpler on a whiteboard until you actually calculate the propellant requirements, and then it turns out to cost more than it saves. But there's a long-term vision here that changes everything. The moon itself becomes part of the solution. Oxygen is abundant on the lunar surface, and oxygen makes up the bulk of the propellant by mass. Methane is lighter and can be shipped from Earth more efficiently. What the moon lacks is carbon. Early missions would ship liquid methane and produce oxygen locally through processing regolith. As demand grows, you could eventually transition to more efficient carbon transport methods. A fuel depot in lunar orbit, possibly a modified Starship, would need refrigeration and shade. Large solar panels can double as sun shields, and the power they generate runs the cooling systems. With enough propellant stored, you could fully refuel a lunar Starship or even one headed for Mars. For lunar operations specifically, a second depot near something like the Artemis Gateway Station could top off a lander for descent and then refuel it again for the return. None of this is fantasy. The constraint is timing, not physics. So what's the simplified architecture that actually works? It's surprisingly clean. Expendable Starships carry cargo from low Earth orbit directly to the lunar surface. A separate, mostly empty Starship brings nothing but crew back from the moon. The key assumption is that SpaceX makes LEO refueling work reliably, which is already being tested. The numbers close beautifully. Getting from LEO to the lunar surface takes about 6 kilometers per second of delta V. Coming back takes just over 3. With a Starship dry mass around 150 tons, roughly 1,550 tons of propellant, and a Raptor vacuum ISP around 370 seconds. A fully fueled Starship in LEO can make a one-way trip to the moon and land about 200 to 225 tons of cargo if you're willing to expend the vehicle. For the return, you flip the logic. A Starship leaves LEO with no cargo, lands on the moon with roughly 224 tons of propellant remaining, picks up about a ton of crew in their gear, and has just enough delta V for direct Earth return. And here's the brilliant part. Because Starship isn't human-rated yet, these cargo flights can run in parallel with Artemis without touching the official program. Every fully fueled Starship becomes a lunar landing test vehicle. You can load it with low-value cargo, food, water, spare parts, and quietly build up hundreds of tons of supplies on the moon while perfecting real lunar landings. Any Starship nearing the end of its useful life after several launches becomes a one-way cargo ship. Artemis continues as the official path. Meanwhile, Starship is building a lunar warehouse in the background. If China looks like it's about to land first, a risk-based decision can be made to put crew on Starship based on its actual flight record with cargo. That's exactly how SpaceX approached Dragon. Fly cargo first, build confidence, then add people. This parallel path eliminates interdependencies between vendors and avoids fragile orbit-to-orbit refueling schemes during crewed missions. It's not replacing the plan. So here's what this all comes down to. When Isaac Mann said they'd go with whoever's ready first, he wasn't just setting a deadline. He was acknowledging a hard truth that's been staring us in the face for years. There's no shortcut to the moon that avoids the physics. Dragon can't do it without becoming something it was never designed to be. Hybrid architectures just shuffle the problems around without solving them. And every clever workaround that looks good on paper falls apart when you run the actual delta V calculations. The real, simplified mission isn't about finding an easier path. It's about choosing the architecture with the fewest interdependencies. And that means making a choice. Either commit to SLS and Orion as the long-term solution, accept Blue Moon if it arrives first, or go all in on Starship from day one. The parallel cargo strategy we just walked through, that's not a backup plan. It's the smartest insurance policy NASA could ask for. Build experience, stockpile resources, prove the system with hardware before putting lives on it. And if you never need to use it for crew because Artemis stays ahead, you've still built the foundation for a permanent lunar presence. This is what separates incremental progress from generational leaps. Sometimes the bold choice isn't reckless, it's the only realistic option left. What do you think? Is Starship the inevitable future, or should NASA hedge with multiple systems? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this breakdown changed how you see the lunar landing race, hit that like button and share this with anyone following SpaceX or Artemis. And don't forget to subscribe to Space Update 24 Hours so you never miss our deep dives into what's really happening in space exploration. We'll see you in the next one. ISS, Tiangong Vast, Axiom, Orbital Reef, Starlab. The race for humanity's orbital home is heating up. But who's missing? SpaceX has stayed quiet about space stations. Or have they? SpaceX is secretly planning something far more ambitious, transforming Starship into a rotating gravity station that could solve space travel's biggest challenge. How does a rocket become a space station with real gravity? Let's dive right in. Starship isn't just reshaping how we launch payloads, it's redefining what's possible once we get to orbit. This 50-meter-tall, 9-meter-wide behemoth represents the largest transport system ever built for space operations. But here's where things get interesting. What if Starship didn't just deliver cargo to a space station? What if it became the station itself? The concept is surprisingly straightforward. Launch a Starship, strip out the propellant tanks, outfit it with life support systems, and you've got an instant orbital habitat. The numbers are staggering. Even using just the upper 22 meters of habitable space, SpaceX could create roughly 1,100 to 1,200 cubic meters of usable volume. That's already matching the entire International Space Station from a single launch. But that's the baseline scenario. When you're designing Starship purely as a station module rather than a rocket stage, the constraints disappear. Remove those massive propellant tanks, reinforce the structure, expand the pressurized sections. Version 3. Starship at 52 meters tall, over 3,300 cubic meters. Version 4 at 61 meters, a massive 3,800 cubic meters. And we're still talking about one module. Now here's the real breakthrough. SpaceX isn't planning to stop at one. The vision involves dozens of Starships arranged in a wheel configuration, all rotating around a central hub. Why does this matter? Because rotation solves humanity's oldest problem in space, the absence of